Alright guys, so here's the review of the Nove Marine M001-07. So this isn't the first Nove I've checked out on the channel, but I've actually checked out quite a few, a couple of which I've got down here. So if you haven't already seen these, I'll leave a link to them up in the top here, and I'll also leave a link down in the description, so you can check out the full playlist of all the different ones I've reviewed, because they do have some really interesting pieces. They definitely do things slightly differently. So a lot of them might be a little bit out there, but as I say, they're definitely different. You can't really accuse them of just copying other people. But anyway, getting back to this one. So we'll pop this out of the way for a second, briefly show you the packaging on the way past. It's the standard Nove packaging, pretty useful. You can carry the watch or all the watches in. And here's the watch. So the first thing you're probably going to notice is that crystal is pretty reflective. Definitely needs some more AR on there. So this is actually a sample piece I've got in for loan. It's not the final version as far as I know. They might be able to tweak a few bits, because it's not releasing until January, from what I've been told anyway. So before we get into this in any more detail, let's go over the dimensions. So we've got a diameter of 41.4, which is what it actually said on the listing, but I was surprised to see it was actually 41.4 and not a 41 or 41.5. Then when it comes to the thickness, we've got 13.1, lug width of 20, then the all-important lug to lug is coming in at 47.7. So some pretty nice dimensions, although that diameter is a little bit strange. Then when it comes to the weight on this supply bracelet, with all the links included, it's coming at 158 grams. Then side my 7-inch wrist, it's coming at about 140. So seeing as we're talking about it, let's get a closer look at that bracelet and go into a bit more detail on it. So we've got a mixture of brushed and polishing. Brushed on the outside, and then those centerpieces are polished. Does look really nice. Nicely finished. And you can see that also drops straight down as well, helping with that compact look to look, so it does wear nicely on wrist, as I'll show you later on. So we've got push pins on this, not screws, which is a little bit disappointing, but I can kind of understand why, because it is a really thin bracelet. But it works well enough, and you don't have to do it that often, it's just a one-time thing. Going around to the case, you can see we've got that really interesting case shape, and that really nice dome crystal as well. Got the two crowns there, so that's because this has got an inner rotating bezel, which we'll show you later on, talk about that in a bit more detail. It's a really distinctive overall look, I think. You don't really see anything like Nove. It tends to be like that with all their watches. As I say, they just do things a little bit differently. And you can see on that inner rotating crown, we've actually got something on there. I wasn't sure what this was at first, so we're going to zoom in and I'll show you that. So that is actually lumed, but you might have noticed on this one, it is slightly off center. But again, as I say, this is just a sample piece, this isn't the final production. So hopefully that won't be the case when you get the final ones if you do end up buying one of these. And then with that other crown, you can see we've got the N for the Nove on there, the logo. It's all really nicely finished as well. With the case finishing, we've got again a mixture of brushed and polished. So the center section is brushed, and then those faceted edges are polished. Going around to the clasp, you can see we've got the Nove brand in there at the top, and then again that Nove logo. So we've got that polished fold over. It is just a friction based clasp. Would have been nice if it had been a push button or something, but it works well enough. And you can see we've got some detailing written on there as well, on the milled section, indicating that it is a ratcheting clasp. So flick it round, you can see using those double pushes, and then we've got plenty of adjustment there. So you can use that on the fly or for diving. So now let's take a look at the case back on this. So you can see we've got a display case back, that custom rotor on there as well, with the Nove branding again, and it is an SW200 movement in this. And you can probably also see as well, we've actually got quick release on the bracelet, which is a nice touch. Do appreciate that, so if you do want to swap it out, you can do easily. Then we've just got the usual kind of stuff around the outside. So with this one we've got Swiss made, then Marine, which is the model name, automatic, sapphire crystal, Nove, all stainless steel, and 200 meter water resistance. So now let's take a look at that dial, talk about that in a bit more detail. So I'll chuck in some macro on this, hopefully you won't see the glare too much in the reflection. So it is a really interesting dial. So as I said, we've got that inner rotating bezel, and you can see the numbers on that and the actual markers are actually floating above the rest of the dial. So that does add a little bit of depth to the dial, and it's just a really cool effect as well. Do like that. And then we've got that fixed black bezel on the actual outside, with the Lume sections in as well. Then when it comes to the branding on there, we've got the Nove logo, which is applied, as is the Nove text. Then the only other thing on the dial is obviously the date window at the 3 o'clock, and then the text at the bottom, automatic, Swiss made, which is just printed. When it comes to the hands, we've got really nice proportions on all of them, and then we've got that paddle on that second hand in red. Nice broad hands for the hour and minute hands, so you can get plenty of lume in there, which we'll be checking out in a bit. Before we do that though, let's check out whether we've got sapphire crystal on this, using the trusty diamond selector 2. And yep, we have got sapphire crystal. Quickly flick it round and check out the back, see if that is as well. And yep, we've also got sapphire on the back, which again, is always good to see. Not always a given. So now, let's talk about this movement in a bit more detail. So if we unscrew the bottom crown, then you can see we've got that nice little red section there, so you know when it is open, so you don't accidentally leave it open and unscrewed. Pop it out to the first position. We can change the date. Pop it out to the second position. Second hand stops, you got hacking. And as I said, this is the Sellita SW200 movement in this. Pop it back in. Second hand re-engages. Then you got hand winding. All works nicely, nice and smooth, no issues at all. So then we can just screw the crown back down. And again, you'll know when it's fully screwed in, because that red section will go. Now let's talk about this inner rotating bezel. So again, screw down crown. And as soon as it's unscrewed, again, we've got that red section that will pop out, and the bezel will be able to move. You don't need to pull it out or anything. Once it's unscrewed, it's freely moving. And it's a really smooth action on it as well. No jitter or anything, and obviously bi-directional, as you'd expect. So when it comes to screwing it back down, as soon as you push it down, it will stop moving, and then you can just screw it. And again, do it until the red section is not visible, so you know it's properly screwed down. Nope, not quite got it lined up there. Just unscrew it again. I'll line it up properly. That should be more like it, if I do it there. Yeah, that's looking more like it. So obviously, you've got it infinite adjustment, so you should be able to get it perfectly lined up. It's just going to be down to whether you do it yourself. So you're probably wondering now, is the lume on this any good? Let's check that out now and find out. So you can see we've got a bit there already, but let's charge it up, give her a proper chance. And there we go. So as you can see, we've got a nice glow of that green C3. And it's really impressive, at least initially anyway. So we've got loads of lume on those hands, with a nice broad area, so as you'd expect, they've got a lot on there. Got an interesting lume on that second hand. They've actually lumed the full thing, not just the paddle on the end. So that's kind of inverted almost. Looks like a needle, or the end of a needle, where you thread it through. Interesting, do like that. And then we've got those lume sections on that outer bezel, not just the lume pip. And then on that inner rotating bezel, we've also got lume on there as well. Although that isn't as bright, as you'd kind of expect. There's not as much surface area, they're not as broad, so they haven't been able to get as much on. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy between the hands, the outer bezel and the inner bezel. But either way, it looks good. In terms of longevity, I'll speed this up a little bit so you can see what's going to happen. You could probably guess. So as you'd probably expect, that needle second hand is going to fade first, because there's just not that much surface area on it. But it's not that big a deal, doesn't really affect the usefulness of the watch. And then the next thing that is going to fade slightly more is that inner rotating bezel, again, as you'd expect. In terms of the hands and the outer bezel, those last a really good amount of time, no issues at all, so definitely really usable. The rest of it is still visible, just not as bright. And don't think I've forgotten about that lumed crown. We're going to check that out now. So give it a quick charge up. So as you can see, it's not going to be all that useful, I wouldn't have thought. Perhaps if you're diving, maybe helps you figure out where it is if you need to change it and use it. But either way, it's a nice little design touch. So I do appreciate it for that. Now we've got this a bit closer to the camera, you can see the lume is still really usable on the dial. So now you're probably wondering how much is all this going to cost you. So I'm going to be straight with you, it's not a cheap watch. It's a lot more expensive than watches I tend to review on the channel. So it's going to be coming in at $1,080, which is about £861, about €991. But don't forget, that's because this is a Swiss-made watch with a Swiss movement in, that SW200. So obviously that always involves some kind of premium in terms of price. So if you're still interested in picking one of these up, you're going to want to know what it looks like on wrist and how it wears, and also what the pros and cons are. So let's do that now. So here's what it looks like on my 7-inch wrist. And I do think it wears really nicely. And obviously with this clasp you can get the perfect fit. It's nice and easy to adjust on the fly as well, you don't even have to take it off. I think the bracelet looks really nice as well, with the mixture of brushed and polished. And it's just an interesting design as well. That kind of H-link, in terms of the case, conforms the wrist really well, despite that slightly unusual look to it. Again, I like the nice little polished details we've got on there. Just catching the light nicely, especially with all those different angles. Just makes it look interesting. So, again, the main issue with this, as I've been saying throughout the video, is that AR, or the slight lack of AR. It is a really nice domed crystal, do appreciate that. As for the rest of it though, I can't really fault it other than that. You've got sapphire crystal front and back. You've got that nice custom rotor on the SW200. As I say, the bracelet is really nice. If I'm being nitpicky, perhaps they could have changed this clasp slightly. Just have the extension bit on the inside maybe, if you prefer that. Possibly change the fold over and have pushes instead. But again, it's being slightly nitpicky. We've got really good lume on it, we've got that inner rotating bezel which is nice and smooth, works perfectly. And it's got an interesting design to it as well, with that kind of floating 3D effect. Oh, I forgot to mention as well, if you're not keen on this black and you want a slightly different colour, they're going to be doing a green version and also a blue version apparently. So if you are still interested, I'll leave the link down in the description so you can check out all the details and keep track of what's going on. But that's it for this one guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.